I came into the job with a great deal of political interest in the future of the organisation and the eyes of the world kind of watching what we were going to do. I like to think one of the early things we've done is actually settle down the issue about our future. The government announced in May that we would indeed be going into the National Crime Agency, but what they also announced was that the 6 principles of our operating model would be preserved. Those principles are about partnership working, they're about having multidisciplinary staff, experts from different fields, keeping our brand, operational autonomy for the Chief Executive, currently me, a separate board structure for me to report to, so I report to a body of people representative of the not just government but also the industry and the safeguarding community, and finally a level of set aside funding so that we can plan year to year. Those are the 6 principles that make us what we are, and they were very firmly signed up to by the Home Secretary and by ministers back in May. So I like to think we sorted that out. The build of the National Crime Agency has been going on since then, and of course Keith Bristow has recently been appointed as Director General, and we welcome that very much. I'm very confident about our future in the National Crime Agency, and perhaps we'll talk about that longer, but all the while that's been going on, there's been some other really good work going on in the centre, and of course while all that stuff's going on, that's what tends to occupy me. What tends to actually occupy the other people in the centre is doing frontline work that safeguards children. So it's been very productive in that sense, and highlights would include our launch of Operation Rescue, which we did in The Hague back in April or May, a huge investment of time by the centre, coming to fruition over about 4 years, and hundreds of children safeguarded in this country alone, and links to offending around the world. That was quite something. We also saw the end of Operation Alpine, which is an operation that I started in Lincolnshire 4 years ago, and we did it in partnership with CEOP over the last 4 years. 5 people pleading guilty to key offences at Nottingham Crown Court earlier this year. So a lot of the things that we get involved in are long-term investments of time, and it's strange because sometimes you get a fantastic result and it looks as if you've been hugely busy. Actually, that's the consequence of 3 or 4 years hard work just coming to fruition. So there's that. We've also had a really good time in terms of our education, and I can talk through some of the things we're doing around education. And importantly for me, our partnership relationships have all been retained, but actually we've created some new partnership relationships, and we look set fair for the future. I think firstly, we had a fairly stark choice. We could either go independent and be a small independent organisation of some 120 people, or we could go into the National Crime Agency. For me, that's no choice. The agency, as it's forming, looks like being the kind of place where CEOP can thrive. In every sense, in terms of law enforcement, it's good news because it enables us to access more resources, gives us more of an opportunity to influence national policing agenda, not least through the national tasking process. And it just seems to be the right place to position ourselves, provided we have those guarantees, which we've had, about preserving CEOP and transitioning us into the agency rather than merging us or acquiring us or something like that. Language is very important. It's not a merger. CEOP is transiting into the National Crime Agency because it's the best host for us. So that's really positive. I think the other opportunities are to do 2 things about learning. One is we can learn from some of the other people who are also coming into the agency. Every day's a school day, and there's stuff we can learn from others. But also importantly, I think there's some very significant benefits about CEOP's operating model that we're only too keen to share with other people so that the NCA becomes the best it can be. That's what we're about. It's a fascinating question. I think Operation Or, for example, was a commercial selling of access to a warehouse of child abuse imagery, a great deal of criminality, and a hugely impactful operation in the UK and elsewhere. I think our understanding of the picture has changed. Firstly, the offenders we're dealing with tend less to be the keepers of large warehouses of data, selling access. We see far more what we call peer-to-peer activity, where people meet each other online, become parts of known groups and trusted groups, and so they share child abuse imagery between themselves, not always for payment. So the whole model of how child abuse imagery is circulated online has changed, and we've had to change with it, of course. Another key change over the last 5 years is that really there's not much distinction anymore, certainly in young people's lives, between being online and offline. If you've got a smartphone or an iPad and you're walking around with it, you are online and offline at the same time. And I know kids who can, wave goodbye to their friends at the school gates, go on Facebook on the school bus, put something on Facebook, responded to by their friends by the time they've got home. The fact is that online is no longer something you do sat at a computer plugged into a wall, which is pretty much where it was, I think, 5 or 6 years ago. And we have to respond to that as well. A whole number of other issues. There are countries around the world acquiring internet access where it's proliferating that weren't around 5 or 6 years ago. And our understanding of the relationship between online activity and offline physical harm to children has developed in that time. There are also new manifestations of harm, such as the issue of street grooming, which has been very much in the news this year. We published a thematic assessment on that called Out of Mind, Out of Sight back in July. So what we're trying to do is aim not just at child protection online, though that's still very much of our core business and certainly part of our heritage, but also aim to do whatever it takes to protect children from sexual exploitation and sexual abuse. Some of that is online activity where we have a particular expertise. Some of it is other kinds of activity. The point is not to compete with anybody else, but to look across the piece of UK law enforcement and education and partners and look at what most needs doing that will have the biggest impact on that issue of child sexual exploitation and abuse, and then we aim to do that, whatever that is. Yeah, thank you. Most Wanted is one of the many jewels in the crown we have here. We have a number of things of which we're intensely proud and are very productive. Most Wanted is a scheme whereby we identify people who are high risk to children, quite often because they're registered sex offenders who have gone on the run, or sometimes for other reasons. We have a very high hit rate and a quick hit rate in terms of publishing Most Wanted cases. We had a pair of brothers who we publicised who were in the European continent earlier on this year. They were brought in very, very quickly indeed. We try and strike the right balance between making the best use of what is clearly a powerful tool to which the public pay attention and not overdoing it. And obviously what we want to do is, as with all the other great tools that we have in the toolbox here, we want to use it in the best possible way to protect children. So it's been a great success. The public responds fantastically to the CEOP's Most Wanted, as do the media. And one of the most heartening things about working here is the fact that there is so much support for what we do. There is so much support for the principle of protecting children. It makes persuading people to do things we ask them to do very straightforward by comparison with some other jobs I've had in the past. We've kept all the partners we had and we've gained some new ones. I find no difficulty at all in getting people to help us. But I think it's important to say a couple of things about how we do that. Firstly, I don't actually go looking for cash, because cash is quite hard to spend. Perversely, cash spending normally means you have to employ people. That's a lead-in time, and then you have to deal with all the things that come from acquiring additional staff. And of course, when the cash doesn't come in anymore, you then have an issue to deal with. What we try and do with our partners is look at synergy, where they have an interest in doing something, where we have a converging interest. For example, you might find that one of the large manufacturers and suppliers of computer equipment might well see a benefit for them, ethically and morally, as well as in terms of corporate social responsibility, in building in greater safety for children into their product. We see a benefit for that as well, because we don't want the internet to be like the Wild West, completely lawless and unregulated. We want it to be a safe place for children and to be a place where offenders don't want to go. So actually, when you put it in those terms, lots of people want the same thing as us, and it's about finding a way of harnessing that synergy. We have some strategic partners who give us more than that synergy because we've had a long-standing relationship with them, and it's a question of knowing their strengths, and they've got huge strengths. These are enormous international organisations, and identifying those things that they can help us with. The quality of that dialogue is that they know the centre well enough, they can spot things that they can do for us, and that's really where we've got to with those relationships. Good example of that would be BAE Systems Detica, who recently became strategic partners of ours. One of the teams of their staff who are embedded within CEOP won the BAE Systems Detica Chairman's Gold Award just last week. Which is a massively high recognition from an enormous worldwide corporation for the particular contribution they've made here. So we don't look for cash, we're not putting out the begging bowl, we're an organisation that is going to carry on functioning regardless of the support we get from partners. We just kind of think there's a lot of people out there who might like to help us, and that's the basis on which we approach partners, and we have no difficulty. We have people from a whole host of different backgrounds working here, and I remember when I was chief officer in police forces and used to sit in front of new recruits on day one and say, there is no perfect background for being a police officer or PCSO. It's what you've learnt from where you've been, all that life experience, and bring it with you. Don't imagine you're wiping clean and starting again. All that's important. And I kind of feel the same thing about people here. Key characteristics that you do see are a massive commitment to protecting children, a great deal of belief in what they're doing, a huge amount of resilience in terms of being prepared to go not just the extra mile but the extra 10 miles or marathon if needs be to achieve what needs to be achieved. And we do some fairly careful psychological assessment of people both before they arrive and while they're here, just to make sure that they have the coping mechanisms that you absolutely need if you're going to be around this material. People here don't spend all day looking at child abuse imagery. Some of them spend a lot of their day doing it, but the fact is you can't work around here without being aware of some of the appalling things that happen to children, and you've got to have a mechanism for coping with it. So in essence, massive commitment, huge professionalism, huge skills and experience in different areas, and the ability to cope. We are hugely blessed, and one of the great blessings I have here is just about the best quality workforce anybody could wish for. The issue is actually reining them back occasionally, certainly not motivating them to get going. They're fantastic. Thanks for asking the question. I think the centre could do better in terms of explaining what services we offer to police forces. Next year we intend to do just that. We're going to provide some written literature. We've got single points of contact in forces, but they may not always be able to pass that information on to people who most need it. I go to various policing conferences and meetings when I'm invited, just to talk about the centre and remind people what services we offer. I think, to be fair, we've been in a kind of rebuilding year where some of the services that used to be here have had to be reinvented and redeveloped, and I think we're just at this point going into 2012 when those services are ready to roll. So we intend, the whole point of developing these services is so that people use them. They don't cost anything. They are services to police forces to enable them to protect children better, and people only have to get hold of us on the CEOP website to ask, and we'll lay our wares out before them. We'll also try and do a more proactive job next year of doing that for ourselves.